Okay, so the City of Clearwater is excited to celebrate International Compost Awareness Week, which is this week, with this discussion and with our partners, Pinellas Community Compost, Blue Green Connections, and Infinity Landscape. As many of us continue to spend most of our days at home, learning to live more sustainably is not only important, but also entertaining. Whether it's starting a small garden, creating ecosystems in our yards, trying out a zero or low waste lifestyle, or just improving the aesthetic quality of our properties, today's discussion has something for all. Reducing waste is especially important for the City of Clearwater and its sustainability plan known as Clearwater Greenprint. In the plan, the city has committed to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions using strategies that also work to make our community a great place to live, work, and play. Upcycling our food and yard waste is a fantastic way each of us can reduce our personal carbon footprint and improve our beautiful Tampa Bay ecosystems. We will learn more about those benefits today, and we'll address the many questions regarding compost and anaerobic digestion. Okay, so tonight's panelists, I'm excited to introduce tonight's panelists, each of whom bring a unique experience and perspective on transforming organic waste into treasure. We will start with Tracy. So Tracy Love Tippin has been actively involved in promoting environmental sustainability since living in Costa Rica 10 years ago. In 2016, she earned a permaculture design certificate and began working as the US marketing manager for Home Biogas, a company based in Israel that develops small-scale anaerobic digesters. She has been turning her food waste into cooking gas and liquid fertilizer in her backyard for the last 4 years, and enjoys sharing her experiential knowledge of this method of upcycling organic waste. She currently works as the director of Blue Green Connections, a nonprofit based in Dunedin that promotes the sustainable use of our lands and waters. And next is Mark. Mark McKenzie has been in the residential service business for over 30 years. His passion for soils has led him to develop an innovative biological lawn care program that he originated in his native land of Canada. He purchased Infinity Landscape in the summer of 2019, which is based out of Riverview, and will soon be introducing his biological lawn care program to the region. Using a signature compost tea, the natural life in the soil gets the grass the nutrients it needs. Mark has also run apple seed farms with his wife, Kathy, using the same principles of soil stimulation to grow vegetables. He is father of 4 and grandfather of 1, and is passionate about leaving a better place for future generations. And finally, we have Amanda Streets. Amanda is a mother and lifelong gardener who grew up on a small farm in Michigan. After moving to Florida for college, Amanda spent 11 years as an educator. She left public education and now focuses on ecological landscaping, permaculture, and composting. Amanda holds a permaculture design certificate from Grow Permaculture and expects to complete the Foundations courses Soil Health with Dr. Lang Ingham's Soil Food Web School in the spring of 2020. So that's coming up, Amanda. She is an active member in the US Composting Council and Permaculture Institute of North America. So a big thank you to each of our panelists for sharing their knowledge and experience with us this evening. And we can get into some questions. So this first question I'm actually going to tackle because I have the inside scoop of sorts from working within the City of Clearwater. So in Pinellas County, we primarily have 2 options with waste, and that's garbage versus recycling. When you place something in your garbage, it's taken to the county's waste to energy facility, which you may have seen if you've traveled on 275. It's a big facility. It looks like it has smokestacks, but it's actually water vapor that's coming out of the top. At that facility, 90% of the county's garbage is burned in an emission-controlled facility to create electricity for 40,000 homes in the area. The remaining 10% of garbage is placed into the landfill that is on site at that same location. Recycling, on the other hand, can be great, but only if we are recycling properly. Currently, the City of Clearwater has to take roughly 30% of its recycling to the waste to energy facility because it's just contaminated. It either has been contaminated by like food waste and liquids, or it's simply just not recyclable items like plastic bags to begin with. what I love about composting is that you, the composter, have more say in where your waste ends up. You know where it's going because it's usually your backyard, and you know what it will be made into, especially when it comes to things like paper. So paper very easily absorbs liquids. So when it's placed in your recycling and you either place food waste or liquids in with it, or your neighbor does, it very easily gets contaminated. But on the other hand, in composting, paper is great, and shredded paper is even better. And most recycling programs, I know for the city of Clearwater definitely, and most within the country actually can't accept shredded paper as recycling because it's so small. It ends up all over your street before it even makes it to the recycling facility. And shredded paper is great to compost. And so that's just an example of why composting can really fill a gap right now with our waste processing systems. Okay, so for the next question, we're going to discuss what is compost. And for this one, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda Streets first.
Hi, everybody. So compost is a natural product that you make by mixing different types of organic materials that came from nature together so that breaks down and returns to the earth, it returns to soil. We're doing this so that we can mimic what's happening in a forest where leaves are falling and fruit and sticks and all of that stuff is sitting on the forest floor and breaking down naturally. Well, we're not doing it exactly like that in our yards. What we're doing is we're piling it up into a heap or putting it into a container. We're accelerating that process so that it can happen faster. So that natural decomposition of the organic materials is really rich in nutrients and beneficial microorganisms that your plants actually need so that they can absorb nutrients from the soil. So think of it like a probiotic for your soil and a fertilizer replacement. There's a couple words we're going to talk about today. When you're composting in your backyard, usually you're composting aerobically with oxygen. And usually those backyard composting systems, you want to avoid having them go anaerobic without oxygen, because that's when you start to get the smells and the unpleasant things that a lot of people associate with composting. But there are different ways to compost anaerobically, and we're going to talk about that today.
I'll just like to pick up on a point that Amanda brought up there, Sharon, if I could. So she talked about fertilizer and how compost can provide the nutrients, for your plants, and it's very important to note that man-made fertilizer, works, in a lot of cases, but it's sort of shortcutting what nature will do. So you've got the nitrogen in the air. The air is 78% nitrogen. For some reason, we spend $65 billion a year buying nitrogen that we put on soils, but the air is 78% nitrogen. And through the microbes in the soil, the microbes in the compost pile, they can literally take the nitrogen out of the air and turn it eventually through about a 3 or 4 step process into a form that's taken up by the plant. But certainly the fertilizer can shortcut that by making it water soluble. So when we're talking about replacing the fertilizer, and it is a bit of a longer process the microbes have to go through, but that's what they do. They cycle nutrients from the air and from the organic matter in your compost pile or in your soil, wherever, and turn them, as Amanda was saying, to form nutrients, important nutrients that are good for the plant. A lot of the fertilizers we get just have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those 3 nutrients are important, but there's 17 nutrients plant-like, and you'll get all 17 if you have a good functioning soil food web in the soil that will recycle these nutrients.
That's an excellent distinction, Mark. I think a lot of people know that compost provides nutrients, but they don't know that it goes kind of above and beyond that synthetic fertilizer component. So thank you for that. Okay, Amanda, did you want to get into the recipe for compost?
So all compost, if it's made aerobically, it needs 4 things. first of all, we have the naturally occurring things, the air and the water, and then you'll be adding nitrogen-rich materials and carbon-rich materials. The nitrogen-rich materials are commonly referred to as greens. That's where you get your food scraps, coffee grounds, grass clippings, weeds, and any animal manure like horse, chicken, rabbit, cow, and tea or tea leaves. This is considered wet materials usually, and a lot of people will only use this. I'm composting my food waste. Well, when you're just adding food waste and putting it in a pile, that's not composting. That's making a pile of food waste. That's probably going to be smelly and attract animals and flies, and I like to call that a slime pit. So what we like to do is we like to balance that out with some brown materials, some carbon-rich materials, and these mostly come from trees. So we're talking about dried leaves, mulch, straw, pine needles, paper. Shredded paper is great. White paper, brown cardboard, paper napkins, and paper towels. And you can even compost toilet paper rolls, paper towel rolls. So you can be creative. What you want to avoid, definitely, is glossy paper, like magazine paper, anything that is glittery, carbon paper, if you happen to get any of that, construction paper, and any cardboard that is colorful or glossy, anything that's not purely brown. If you're composting paper and cardboard, it's really important to remove packing tape. And also, if you're composting your junk mail, those cellophane windows in the envelopes, just rip those envelopes right in half and take out that cellophane window. We don't want to have any of that in the compost. And if you do realize that you've put something in the compost that you shouldn't have, just go ahead and pull it out. It's okay. One other thing you want to try to do is remove your produce stickers. Mm-hmm. Those are actually made of plastic and they won't break down.
That is an excellent point.
Once
when I first started, I had to take them all out. So
yeah, I find them in there every once in a while too. Once you have your greens and your browns, you want to make sure that the compost gets air and that it has water. So we talked a little bit in the beginning about microbes. Your compost is broken down by microbes. It's decomposed by these tiny, tiny microscopic organisms, mostly bacteria and fungus. And those are living creatures, just like you or I or your pets. They need food, water, and air. Well, the browns and the greens are their food, and they need to drink water, and they need to breathe air, oxygen-rich air, preferably. And the happier they are, the better your compost will be. So if the organisms have what they need, you'll be making good compost. It won't smell or attract pests or anything, and it'll be good for your plants.
Awesome. And did you want to mention, or did you want me to mention the importance of getting free mulch from the county's service?
So I'll take this one. Pinellas County has a number of free locations to pick up mulch. When I make compost, I try not to buy anything additional because I'm recycling. If I'm already providing the food scraps and the browns and stuff, having to go to the store and buy something that's in a plastic bag, like a bag of mulch, well, that's kind of counterintuitive. We want to try to keep this low waste. So it's really nice to be able to have these free mulch locations around town, around the county. There's a map, and this is available online as well. A lot of them are at the recycling centers where you can drop off if you don't have recycling pickup at your home. The one thing, and this is on the description, if you're going to get mulch, it's really important that you cover the load if you're filling up a pickup truck or a trailer. You do need to bring your own materials, your own equipment like a shovel or a pitchfork. And for those of you who don't have a truck or a trailer to bring, I bring my car, and I bring 5-gallon buckets or a Rubbermaid tote. and that keeps the mulch contained and out of my car.
Awesome. Thank you. So what Amanda just described is primarily, and it is aerobic compost, right? But there are multiple types of composting, and we thankfully have, as a panelist, someone who specializes in the opposite, which is anaerobic composting. So the question here is, are there different methods of upcycling food waste at home? And I would like to turn to Tracy first to see if she can answer that. And I'm kind of giving it away by saying yes. So.
Well, thank you for having me. By the way, I think that one of the big takeaways from this should be a kind of a change in mindset and not thinking about our food scraps as waste at all, but actually viewing it as the valuable resources that they are. They're full of energy, they're full of nutrients, and we should be utilizing that. So there are different types of upcycling your waste. As Amanda mentioned, there's anaerobic methods and aerobic, and the composting that she spoke about is the aerobic method. Anaerobic method, there are a couple different types. Bokashi composting is actually anaerobic digestion that has gone through various phases. And there's also anaerobic digestion that creates biogas. So that's a separate type of anaerobic digestion. It takes it one level further than the bokashi in that it's comprised of several different processes. So first, there are bacteria in it that break it down into just smaller food wastes, and then there's a different type of bacteria that break down those smaller food wastes into acids. And that's what, when you talk about your compost pile becoming smelly, it's usually because it's stopped at that process. It's got the acids and it's got kind of a putrid smell. Bokashi takes it one step further into a fermentation process. That's the next step also in an anaerobic digester. And so the results of the bokashi is going to not have that putrid odor, but more like a vinegary smell. And then anaerobic digestion, there's another type of bacteria in addition to the acidogens and the acetogens and the hydraulic bacteria, and that's the methanogens, which are actually archaea. It's not even bacteria, but that takes the results from the acetic bacteria and turns it into biogas. So yeah, and so there are various methods of upcycling the waste. You can do it outdoor in compost bins. You can do it, there are a couple of examples there, just a chicken wire compost bin. You can buy a commercial compost bin. They also have tumblers. And then the one on the very right is a home biogas system, and that is the biodigester that I was talking about. You put the food waste in, it goes to that bottom tank. The bacteria work on it, produce the biogas, which is stored in the top tank, and then you have two byproducts. You've got gas and fertilizer.
Awesome. So, and Tracy, you cook using that gas, right?
I do. I cook. I've been using the system for 4 years. I started off with it outside. I have since pulled it into my house. It fuels my main kitchen stove. So I cook on it every day. It's my primary source of energy for my cooking. And I love it. So, yeah. So those are some outdoor systems, and then there are also, you can, if you're, lots of people are in apartments who don't have outdoor space. There are also vermiculture you could practice, and that's where you use worms to break down the food waste. And then that's that on the left side there is the bokashi I was speaking about that goes through the fermentation process. So lots of different to upcycle, and I think it's really important for everybody to kind of think about what their motivations are for this, what their lifestyle is, and choose what fits best for you. Because honestly, all of these are great. They all have advantages and disadvantages, but just I think if everybody can just take care of their food waste at home using any of these methods is highly beneficial.
Yeah, I agree with Tracy on that last point, very strongly. The main thing is just to get out and do it. You're going to get a lot of information here, and some of it might be a little bit intimidating to somebody that hasn't really started, but but you can rest assured that if you just give these microbes a chance, regardless of what system you're using, give them the right chance, and by getting started, they will find a way to compost the organic matter and turn it into something useful in your garden and your lawn, or really just to do your civic duty to try to reduce the amount of waste that does go to the landfill. If you can find some way to make it useful on your property, that's going to benefit everybody. I wanted to just make a couple notes on some of the outdoor compost systems that we have on the slides here. So when I've gone around and looked at various composters that a lot of homeowners are using, a lot of times it is a little bit stinky. And I think that's where it gets the reputation from, because if there's not a lot of air, that's probably the one thing that's missing in most of the compost systems, in my opinion, is enough air. And that's why I like that cage. The cage is wide open, got lots of air. There's far less opportunity for that to go anaerobic in the wrong way. By the way, as Tracy's pointing out, there's a right way to do anaerobic composting, but as Amanda pointed out, just throwing it into heat, isn't probably going to get you the results that you want. You're far better off using that open cage with lots of air circulating in and around. It's much more forgiving, in my opinion, than the big plastic containers that only have a few air holes. So if I was going to give any advice to the beginners, I would just use the wide open cage as the first starter, because it's going to be much more forgiving for you.
Thank you, Mark. I want that statement on a t-shirt, by the way. Give microbes a chance.
Yeah, all we are saying.
Amanda, did you have anything that you wanted to add for this question?
With these different bins, pick whatever works for your lifestyle, your yard, your home. But especially if you're first starting out on a budget, some of the DIY things that you'll find online, or like that wire cage, they're really cheap. And they work just as well as the fancy prefabricated things. In that worm bin on the next page, on the next slide, the blue one in the middle, that's made with 2 Rubbermaid toads. And it works just as well, if not better, than the green stacking tower. By the way, if you live in an apartment, this is totally accessible for you to do these indoor composting options. I had the green worm bin in my dining room for almost a year before anybody in my house knew it was there. There was no odor, there were no fruit flies, there were no bugs. I just followed the directions and made sure there were no visible food scraps. And that's pretty much the case for all of these backyard composting systems, is you don't want any visible food scraps. That should always be covered up with the brown materials. And yeah, they're great, and it's a really good way to reduce your food waste and to make good soil, even if you're just adding it to your houseplants or your patio gardens. You're going to see a marked difference in their growth.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so what are the ecological benefits of composting and anaerobic digestion? Let's see, how about Mark? Do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. Well, the ecological benefits of composting are many. We've touched on a few already. One is reducing the amount of waste that goes into a landfill. But there's a lot of benefits right around your own property. If you give it a try and are halfway successful in getting a decent compost pile, it can help your houseplants, can help your vegetable garden, and if you can brew a tea, there's tea brewing kits that you can get that will basically dislodge the bacteria and fungus, a good bacteria and fungus from the compost, put into a solution, add some foods into that, and then they multiply like crazy in that solution. Then you add that to your lawn or your plants or your ornamental shrubs, whatnot, and you will really stimulate the soil food web in a much faster way with the compost tea. So that's one of the just one of the many benefits around your property from good composting methods.
Great, thank you. Amanda, did you want to comment on this one too?
Yeah, so the way that plants work, they have an above ground system with stems and branches and leaves. Then they have the roots below the ground. So above the ground, the plants, they make energy from the sun through photosynthesis, but below the ground, they take in their water and their nutrients from the soil. And the microbes that you cultivate in your compost actually have a symbiotic relationship or a beneficial partnership with those plants. The plants release these signals to the microbes and say, hey, this is what I need. And the microbes, if they're happy and healthy, will come running and say, I've got you, don't worry, I've got what you need. So they have this symbiotic kind of partnership relationship. The plants give the microbes what they need, the microbes give the plants what they need. So when you are when you're looking at your lawns, your gardens, some of the things that can damage your soil or harm your plants is bare soil. So whether or not you're actually putting compost in your yard or not, one of the most important things that you can do is cover up that soil. As I drive around town, I see a lot of dirt rings around trees, palm trees, bare soil, and that bare soil is bare probably because it's been sprayed, but over time it will not have any of those beneficial microbes. So whatever plant is in the middle of that circle is not going to be happy and healthy because it doesn't have the ability to have those microbial partnerships. So that's one thing that you might consider, even if you're not composting, is just add some mulch or some leaves or something to cover up that soil.
Awesome. Tracy, did you have anything? Oh, it sounded like Mark.
Oh, sorry, I'll just interject for just a moment. There's one other ecological benefit of having a healthy soil food web with lots of organic matter and compost type activity in your lawn, for example, is you will hold a lot more water right where the plant needs it. And you know, we don't have a shortage of water in this area like other parts of the country, but for anywhere where they experience a lot of drought, we do have droughts here, you know, but water is a bit more plentiful here. But if you have what's called a soil carbon sponge with a foot or two below the surface, it will hold a lot more water and reduce the drain on municipal resources for water.
It's great that you brought that up, Mark, because actually today we just got a notice that we do have a water shortage notice, and it's taking effect in May 8th, and it's lasting until July, and it includes Pinellas County. So very timely information on that.
There you go. Okay.
On that water note, it does hold more water in the soil. Adding compost to your soil does. It also helps with drainage issues. So if you have standing water in your yard, it very well could be because your soil is really compacted, and adding just a little bit of compost to it will help that water over time, help that water drain down better. I had that problem in my yard and was able to rectify it by adding about a 1/4 inch of compost.
Okay.
And so, and I'd like to just add that with regard to that specific benefit of retaining water, that has far more reaching effects than just your yard. It's keeping chemicals and fertilizers out of our oceans, out of the Gulf of Mexico, and we know, you know, that kind of thing can contribute to all types of harmful algae blooms and eutrophication, and so that's got far more reaching effects than just our own property. I would like to touch on some ecological benefits of anaerobic digestion because there are some different ones. Fertilizer. You know, obviously it gives a nutrient-rich fertilizer. I didn't really go into the details of that, but it has pretty much almost all of the nutrients of what you're putting into the system is retained. Some of, you know, the carbon is going off as methane, and it loses a little bit of nitrogen, but the vast majority of it is retained. So you have all the micro and macronutrients that you're putting into the soil there, and it comes out as a liquid, so it can be used either as a root drench or as a foliar spray. That it displaces synthetic fertilizer use, is harmful in various ways, from you know, some of it's from fossil fuels, some of it's from phosphate mining. So it's got that added benefit as well. And then, of course, the anaerobic digestion creates biogas, so it's a renewable energy. It offsets fossil fuel usage, which is you know, it's a big contributor. Fossil fuels are the largest contributor to greenhouse gases, which I think we'll get into maybe a little bit later. But so that's a big ecological benefit there as well. Regarding the waste to energy plant, keeping the amount of waste that's going into that is really very important for us, because it's a, you know, we have limited space, and we're the most populated county in Florida, and so we don't have a lot of space to grow out. And food waste, I believe, accounts for somewhere between 20 and 30% of all solid waste. So if you can take a chunk of it out of the landfill, out of the waste to energy plants, that is highly valuable. And not to mention, water content of food waste is generally at like 70%. So so it creates a more efficient plant as well. So it's not having to go through all of that water.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up too. I mean, I think it's a really valid point to address that. While most, 90% of our garbage is burned to create electricity, the liquids in our food waste can actually make that process more difficult. And Tracy, you touched a little bit on greenhouse gases. So I'm going to stick with you to lead with this next question of what does compost have to do with climate change?
Okay, so I will leave Amanda to discuss specifically what compost has to do, and I'll touch on the
anaerobic digestion as well.
Okay. Okay, so it's anaerobic digestion. Everybody, I think the average food waste per person in the US is about a pound of food waste a day. That 1 pound of food waste will make about 20 to 30 minutes of cooking gas on an anaerobic digester, generally by the next day. So it's a very efficient system. So the amount of fossil fuels it's displacing is actually relatively significant. Our CO2 emissions are, like I said, that's the fossil fuels are the largest contributor to the CO2 emissions, and it's up like 90% since the 70s. So that's a big value to climate change, preventing those greenhouse gas emissions. The other thing, if we weren't in a place that uses an incinerator, which we are, so that's very fortunate, that for people that are maybe not in Pinellas County, if their waste is going to a landfill, it's generating this same methane that's created in the biodigestion process, and it's just going into the atmosphere. And that methane is 25 times more potent of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So it's pretty impactful if we're just letting that escape into the atmosphere. So, and then, so on the gas side of it, it stops, it reduces the amount of drilling you have to do, and probabilities for, leaking and spills and that type of thing. I'm trying to think. I want to make sure I hit all my notes. That I'd say that's the biggest contributor to climate change locally here from anaerobic digestion standpoint. But if I could real quick mention on a global level, globally there are 3 billion people that still cook over open flames. So, and a lot of that they have to deforest their land for. So it really helps with deforestation issues. It helps with air pollution because 4.3 million of them die from indoor air pollution. So you're not having those fumes go up into the atmosphere. And I'm going to leave off some of the other ones because I feel like I'm taking too much time. So go ahead and go.
No, that was excellent, excellent information that I even wasn't aware of. So thank you for that. Amanda, do you have anything that you want to add in regards to climate change?
Yes. So climate change is caused by greenhouse gases. So with compost, we're talking about two greenhouse gases. We're talking about methane. We're talking about carbon dioxide. So methane is actually 30 times more powerful than CO2. So when we have food waste that is rotting in the landfill, it is rotting anaerobically. It's releasing these stinky smells. That food waste rotting is actually that smell that you associate with the city dump. That's food. It's rotting without air, without, you know, carbon, and it's not doing anybody any good, and it's actually releasing these gases that are increasing our planet's temperature. So compost, actually, those microbes, they take that carbon and they help the plants put it into their bodies and into their stems and into their roots, and they help put it into the soil. So they're helping to bring down the carbon from the atmosphere and put it down into the ground where it's supposed to go. I was lucky enough to be able to attend the U.S. Composting Council annual conference this year. And there was the keynote speaker was Dr. Catherine Wilkinson, and she's one of the authors. Project Drawdown is the project, it's a book, and there's a website as well that is a compilation of work by several hundred scientists to rank the best solutions to reverse climate change, to draw down the carbon from the atmosphere and put it into the soil where it belongs. And she said something that really, well, she said several things, but one thing that really stuck with me was that she believes it is a magnificent time to be alive in a moment that matters as much as this one. And that really made me realize how important the small changes that we make in our lives by reducing our food waste, to reduce the methane emissions, and by composting, draw that carbon back down into the soil. Every person's contribution really can make a difference. And when we combine composting with other things associated with landscaping and gardening, like buying local food or growing food, for example, those are all different solutions to reverse climate change. And when we add them up, that becomes dramatic. So if we reduce our food waste and we compost and we make a concerted effort to buy some local food or grow food yourself, that's substantial. So I encourage everybody right now to see what you can do, what small changes that you can make into your habits in your daily life, and see how that can see the difference that it's going to make, because it will.
Awesome. And Mark, did you have anything on this question, or did they cover it?
Yes, for sure. It's one of my favorite questions, and I could go on and on. And we've spent quite a bit of time on this question, but sure, I'm actually believe that climate change can be solved if you do the math. So yes, we all know about fossil fuels. You know, if you're going to take all that trillions of tons of carbon that's sequestered down in the earth and put it up in the atmosphere, of course that's going to change something. You know, Newton said it best: for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So of course the opposite reaction, or the net effect of this, is that it's trapping heat and heating up the planet, particularly the CO2 and the methane that we talked about. But the other source of CO2 in the atmosphere is the destruction of the soils. So all the life that lived underneath the soil when it's tilled up and disturbed and exposed to the sun, that those life forms are decomposed and the carbon dioxide goes back in the atmosphere. Well, the good news is that we can't put the fossil fuels back where we found them without a great deal of expense, but we can put the microbes back in the soil. So if you do the math, there's actually enough grassland along the planet, or across the planet, that if we restored the life in the soil en masse, it would draw down, as Amanda talked about, draw down significant enough carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to reverse some of the path that we're on. It's going to take a lot of work, but the point is that it's possible. And so the interesting thing about microbes is they are life forms, and life begets life. So if you just get the process started properly and don't disturb it, don't till it, and a lot of agriculture systems are moving towards no-till systems, and that the carbon stays underneath the soil, it is drawing down carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it somewhere where it's of use. So for every 1% increase in organic matter, 1 foot down in an acre, you draw down 33 tons of carbon dioxide out of the air. And if you do the math, there's enough land for us to store this excess carbon if we stimulate the life underneath the soil. The problem is that when most of our scientific studies on soil are all about soil chemistry, because it's economically driven by fertilizer and whatnot, and the economic benefits of fertilizer. I'm all for a strong economy, but Amanda referred to mycorrhizal fungi, for example. They're hyphae which extend extensively throughout the soil. It's basically one great big carbon tube. And they also exude a substance called glomalin. This was just discovered in 1996, but it's comprises 1/3 of the soil carbon. This was only discovered and identified in 1996. So it's the last great frontier. We all know about trees storing carbon and being carbon and carbon entities because we can see them. But what we don't see is the massive amount of life underneath the soil and the reservoir which can be expanded to suck down a lot of this carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So we just learn about life in the soil and through our composting, because compost is what kickstarts that action into the soil, along with plants. You need to have higher successional plants, not just weeds. You need to have grasses, shrubs, trees, in order for the full soil food web to come to fruition underneath the soil.
Awesome. I've been saying compost is magic for a long time, and I hope now more people will understand that it really is. And Mark, you mentioned plants right there, and I know we've touched on this question, so we can just stay on it a little bit. We can be brief with this one. How can compost and anaerobic digestion help a plant grow? We've talked a little bit about how compost can make nutrients just far more accessible and can encourage those beneficial microbiotic life to flourish. Amanda, did you have anything you wanted to elaborate more on this one?
Yeah, so when we're using compost, we are making the plants healthier, but we're also making the soil healthier. So if we have a plant, imagine that you're looking at a plant, just like a cross section, so you can see the above ground and the below ground portion. You can see the roots. When we're using compost on the soil, we're improving the soil health with those microbes, those beneficial microorganisms. And it's helping the plants to be healthier, which we see on top. We see the leaves are greener, they're lush, it's fruiting, the flowers are gorgeous. The plant just looks healthy. It doesn't have the yellowing or the drying on the leaves or any of that. But what is really, really great about using the compost is the part that's below the ground, the part that we all probably don't see on a regular basis. The compost is helping that plant take in more nutrients. It's helping that soil to be softer so the roots can go down deeper into the soil. And when the roots go down deeper, it can access more nutrients. The plant can get more nutrients because it's able to extend deeper into the soil, and it's able to access more water. And because of that beneficial relationship, the plant has with the microorganisms, with specifically the fungi, they attach to the plant roots, and they actually can gather those nutrients and water for the plants too. So healthier soil results in healthier plants because you're making the plant roots work better. And that shows in the top part of the plant that you see above ground.
Okay, so I think I'm gonna go to the next question because we've kind of elaborated on this one in the past. And the next question, I think it's primarily going to be probably like it'll be an everyone question, but it's, can I use compost if I'm not growing vegetables?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Compost is great for all plants unless they're in like a dune, like sand dune type ecosystem plant. And then they really don't want the compost. They want their natural ecosystem. But yeah, compost is great for your tropical landscaping. It's great for your house plants. Any container gardens that you might have, whether they're vegetables or herbs or just potted plants or shrubs or small trees. It's good for your grass. And you don't need to use that much of it. You don't need to apply it like 6 inches deep or anything. There's a lot of research that says just a quarter or a half inch is enough. So a little bit goes a long.
Yeah, there's one thing I've seen on lawns where compost and top dressing with a compost-based product has been particularly beneficial. Is on our properties, we typically have an unnatural situation. That's, you've got trees right in the middle of grass, and you don't see that in a forest. You don't see grass in the middle of a forest, right? Or you don't often see trees sticking up the middle of a grassland. So by adding compost or some sort of top dressing material in and around where your trees are and the grasses are both competing for the same nutrients, it actually boosts the nutrient availability in that soil so that the trees and the grass aren't competing so much. That's just one thing that humans do that's sort of unnatural, is put a tree right in the middle of grass. And so compost can, and compost tea can have a very beneficial effect to grow the plants that you want to on your property.
Tracy, yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say the same goes for the fertilizer that comes from an anaerobic digestion system. It's nutrients, you're giving those to the plants. It's a liquid form, so easy to apply, and really most plants, not just vegetables, pretty much all plants benefit from the right nutrients. So
awesome. So this one is the one I think is primarily going to be Mark, but you guys might have anecdotal experience. Mark, did you want to talk a little bit about, with your business, the experience you've had, even if, because not everyone wants to grow their own food, right, or have like a fully landscaped out property, and some people are looking for, improvements for their own lawns. Do you have anything that you wanted to discuss further on lawn care, Mark?
Sure. So the typical lawn care programs are chemically based. And in our experience, it's usually about 7 years. I don't know, I think the lawns get a 7-year itch or something like that. It seemed to be, somebody's used the chemical program for about 7 years. Eventually the lawn loses its vitality in the soil and becomes completely dependent on these chemical fertilizers, because the fertilizers and the pesticides have suppressed the natural ability in the lawn to the soil supporting the lawn to produce any sort of nutrient value for the plant. So what I've been doing for the last 30 years is playing around with different ways to increase the soil microbial activity so that they're not quite so dependent on fertilizers. And it's the same patterns is noticed in regenerative agriculture, that so scientifically proven that if you increase the microbial activity in the soil and decrease the amount of pesticides and the amount of excess fertilizer using, that the plants really grow much healthier and develop a lot less problems such as bug infestation or insect infestations. So fungus, for example, in Florida, a lot of lawns can get a sort of bad fungus move in. If you have enough of the good fungus in your soil, they're just going to win the day. So if there's a bad fungus moving in on a lawn, then that's pretty much an indication that there's not the mycorrhizal fungal activity that Amanda was referring to before, where it literally embeds itself right in the plant and forms that symbiotic relationship. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. The fungus goes out and finds nutrients the grass needs, and the grass in turn gives that fungus the proceeds of its photosynthesis, basically, and it starts with glucose after photosynthesis, becomes more complicated molecules in the plant, and then that plant exudes that to the fungus. Without getting too technical, it's just they help each other out with what they need. So anybody that's had a fungus problem or on their lawn has been through the neighborhood, if you add compost, so with the good fungus and the good bacteria and the nematodes and the arthropods, all the other earthworms, good life forms that chemical pesticides will generally knock back, then you're going to avoid problems such as fungus. Same thing goes with insects. Chinch bug, for example, you get that in the heat of the summer. They love very thatchy lawn. So that's sort of the dead and decaying organic matter sitting on top of the grass. And again, if you have the compost type activity in your soil, that thatch sitting on top of the lawn is food. And those bugs will come up and decompose that and reduce the thatch so that you don't get insect infestations like chinch bug, for example. So compost on a lawn has many benefits, and those are a few.
Awesome. And it sounds like, we talked a little bit about how compost is really good at retaining water. Have you, in your experience, seen homeowners need to water their lawn less by adding compost to it?
Well, certainly, yeah. So in the very sandy soils of Florida, you've got too many air pockets. Air pockets in the soil are good. Like if you got a hard clay soil, then you have no air pockets. You want some air pockets, but in the sandy soil of Florida, the air pockets are too big. Call it so the water just percolates right through, down and away. If you have active soil food web, where I referred to glomalin before, it's sort of a sticky carbony substance, it will actually glue the pieces of sand together and reduce the size of the air pockets, so so that the water doesn't percolate so quickly. And the glomalin is a sticky substance, will actually hold the water for much longer than a soil devoid of those microbes. So absolutely, it's an active soil food web with abundant microbes producing substances like glomalin are absolutely going to retain water where the plant needs it. The other thing is the mycorrhizal fungi, hyphae, don't just go out and find nutrients for the plant. It also goes out and finds water that is not necessarily accessible to the root hairs. It's essentially an extension of the root hairs of the plant.
Wonderful, thank you. So we've addressed this a little bit, thankfully, but I wanted to hear from Tracy specifically on, say I have, I'm interested in anaerobic digestion, Tracy, and I want to consider getting that home biogas system. Do I need to worry about my neighbors smelling, weird things?
I think that's an excellent question, and it seems to be a question that's on a lot of people's minds because we actually had a fire marshal in our house just to smell the system. We had they were thinking of getting a system. Actually, our city was thinking of getting a system for the firehouse because it backs up to the community garden, and that was their main concern, was that it smelled. So he actually came to my house for the sole purpose of smelling my biodigester, and the group consensus was that there was no odor. So one of the reasons is that that bottom tank where the food enters it's filled with water. So like I don't want to compare it to a toilet, but you know, when the food waste goes under it, there's no smell that's really escaping from there. And then some people also have a question about the gas, whether the gas has a smell. So in biogas in general has a little bit, so it's anywhere from 50 to 70% methane, 30 to 40% carbon dioxide, and a little bit of hydrogen sulfide, which does have a little bit of an odor. So the home biogas system in particular filters out that. They use activated carbon filter before the gas comes out of the tank into the storage tank. So that doesn't have an odor. Also, it's a closed system. So there's a plunger that goes in the front. So for the digester tank, once you put the food waste in, you screw the little plunger in, and then no odors escapes. And like I said, it does go through those multiple stages of acetogenesis and then the methanogen, making the methane. And by the time it finishes that process, there's a slight odor. You know, when you open the system to put the food waste in, you'll get a little bit of a whiff, but it's not a putrid smell. It's just like it's just a slight odor, but it's in general, it's a sealed system. So
good to know. And Amanda, so say I'm a different person and I'm interested in aerobic composting. I think I'm doing it right, but I do notice that it's starting to smell. What can I do to get my compost back to where it should be and not smell?
So you want to use 60% brown material, and that quantity kind of surprises some people. Like, where do I get it? How do I know I have enough? So that smell is one of the signs that you don't have enough, or that something funky, like maybe some meat, got into your backyard composting system. So you don't have to go through your compost system and figure out if something got in there that shouldn't have. What you can do is just add some brown materials to the top, and also be mindful as you're building your compost of the sides of your pile. The sides, the edges of the pile, you shouldn't see any food waste, even on the sides of your pile. I know that there's a lot of really, really pretty pictures of all of these compost piles with rainbow colored food waste sitting on top, or these perfect lasagna layers that you see with the green materials, the food waste kind of, layered, and then the brown on top. And oh, look, it's so pretty. Don't do that with your compost. It's cute for a picture, but that's not best practice. It should look like a pile of mulch and leaves, or whatever carbon materials you're using. So just don't have any food visible. Don't have any grass or weeds or anything like that visible. Just have it all covered with the carbon, and you'll be successful. And if it smells, just add more carbon. You can also add coffee grounds.
That does do a trick. It does smell really good. It
does, yeah. And it also attracts black soldier flies, which will help decompose the food faster. Their larvae are excellent food waste decomposers.
Well, good. I drink a lot of coffee, so that's definitely been helpful for me. So this is a fun one. I think anyone who has some experience with food upcycling kind of gets this question. So probably less for Tracy. Hopefully people aren't thinking, well, maybe they are, but so say I want to like repurpose my food waste, should I just be putting it in a hole in the ground? Amanda, let's start with you.
So this is a yes and no question. So it's not the best way to compost. You are a little bit limited in that usually if you dig a hole and put food waste into it, first of all, you're not adding the carbon, which is important when you're talking about the microbes and what is healthy compost and healthy soil. And you're typically not also planning on digging it up. So usually when you have a compost pile above ground, your plan is to distribute it around your yard. when you put it in a hole in the ground, usually your plan is to leave it in the hole. If you're choosing to compost in a hole, you have to make sure it's deep enough, because if it's only 8 inches deep and you fill it with 6 inches of food scraps, then you cover it up with some soil, a couple inches of soil. That smell may escape, and even if you can't smell it, sometimes animals can, or your dog or cat may dig it up and roll in it or do something like that. You know, animals, they do strange things. So if that's something that you choose to do, make sure you dig your hole deep enough and cover it very well with several inches, maybe 6 to 8 inches of soil on top. So I choose not to put my compost in a hole in the ground, just because that is not convenient for me. But I do know that some people do like this method. There's just some precautions that you need to take if you're going to do that.
Okay.
There is a product called the green cone, which is essentially this biodigester, where you dig a hole and put this green cone on top of it, and that keeps the animals away, and it basically invites the earthworms that are already in the soil to come and decompose that. It costs a few bucks, but if you want the fancy way to digest your food scraps into the ground, you might want to look into the green cone.
I had not heard of that.
Another thing you can do if you want to compost in the ground is you can use bokashi, the bokashi method, indoors, and then take that fermented food waste outdoors and put that in the ground. And that should not attract any pests, because the food waste has been essentially pickled. So it's no longer interesting or enticing for any animals.
Okay, cool. For the next one, we briefly went over with Amanda what types of items I should be putting into my compost. Amanda, did you want to discuss maybe what I shouldn't be putting into my aerobic compost?
Yes. So I'd like to start out by saying that in nature, anything that comes from nature is able to break down and return to nature. But we're not out in the forest, we're not out in the wilderness. We're in this, most of us are in the city and the suburbs, and we want to make sure that we're making, first of all, good, safe compost, and that it is not going to attract any animals or have any bad smells that will just make your neighbors really unhappy. So what you should not be composting in most compost systems in backyards: meat, dairy, and grease. Definitely avoid those. There are systems that will accept that, or if you are used to having, like, maybe you lived elsewhere and there was municipal composting, or you've had experience with a commercial composting company, they do accept those items. But in the backyard composting systems, those should not be composted. Other things that you might like to avoid are weeds with seeds on them, and invasive plants. You can compost weeds if they don't have seeds on them, but I would be very, very, very cautious in composting anything that you really don't want to grow again in your yard. And definitely don't compost invasives in a backyard system.
I learned that the hard way with Wedelia, which is, you know, an invasive ground cover, and I had to hand pick it all out, so it was not fun. Tracy, when it comes to, you know, anaerobic digestion, there are different rules, right? What types of items should I be putting into my home biogas system, and what should I not?
So anaerobic digesters accept all types of food waste. So you can put meats, dairies, vegetables, fruits. You can put fats and greases in there, although I would limit that. Don't put more than like 20% of your content as a fat, because it'll end up clogging the system. It takes pits and seeds and eggshells. Coffee grinds, they don't recommend. Chicken waste, it takes any type of animal waste as well, especially grass-eating animals actually add to the microbes that are in the biodigester and aid in the decomposition, but not chicken waste because it's high in ammonia and it's a little too alkaline. You can add about 50% of it as chicken waste if you wanted to supplement that with food. They don't recommend putting a lot of citrus peels in there because citrus peels have antimicrobial, like antibacterial on the peels themselves, and that would counter the effect of the bacteria decomposition. But other than that, I mean, it even takes bones. It'll digest bones slowly, but while it's digesting them, it acts as a home for the microbes, gives them more surface area, so it actually increases the population, but I wouldn't put too much of that in there either, just because of the length of time it takes to break down. And then it doesn't accept yard waste that is high in lignin. So any of your hard lignin is what gives your plants the firm structure. So branches, even straw, just anything with high lignin count, they don't recommend. It's not going to break down. It will. Some places say that you can ferment it first, but like for the size system that's for a home use, you just don't want that excess material accumulating in the bottom and taking a really long time to break down. So we just avoid it altogether.
It's amazing to see the differences between the two types, right? They're both food upcycling, but there are slight differences of what is great and what is not, and it just depends on your life cycle really. So lifestyle. Okay, I want to make sure that we can get to some questions at the end, so I'm going to go to the next one. Can I save money by composting? We might each have experiences with this. Mark, do you have any experience or want to say anything if I can save money by composting?
Well, yes, I believe you can. You can, if you're putting fertilizer down in your lawn, commercial fertilizer, chemical fertilizer, by using the free fertilizer you got effectively with your home compost system, go a long way towards saving money in fertilizer. And certainly certain times of year, fertilizer is banned here, so you can provide some help for your lawn when the chemicals can't even use them, and they're not quite as effective as in the long run as composting and putting either compost tea or the compost directly onto your lawn. Okay,
good to know. Amanda, do you have any financial expertise when it comes to composting and how I can save money?
Oh yes. So I do gardening, and if I wasn't composting at home, I would be buying compost in plastic bags, bringing it to my house, and then applying it to my garden. Compost, if you buy a good quality compost, either bagged or you can also get compost in bulk from different compost companies. It's expensive, especially when you start looking into the better quality composts that you might get not necessarily at Home Depot or Lowe's, but more like an independently owned nursery. So yeah, you can definitely save money by making your compost at home.
Awesome. And Tracy, with anaerobic digestion, I think you mentioned one of the ways you might be able to save money, but how do you save money with some of the products of anaerobic digestion?
Right, so obviously you can save with the fertilizer usage, just I mentioned, but also you can save on your gas bills. So Florida actually, our natural gas here is about twice the national average rate. So we save more here in Florida than most places, but it's about $18.50 or so for 1,000 cubic feet of gas, and then this system will produce 25 cubic feet per day, which doesn't sound like a huge amount, but over the course of a year, it's could end up being 100 liters a year or so. And so that on top of the fertilizer, the whole system pays for itself pretty quickly.
Wow. And you're able to do you said all of your cooking using the gas?
Pretty much all of my cooking. I have my setup at my house is that I have 2 burners for biogas and 2 for electric, so that if I do run out of the biogas, I can always fall back on the electric. Or if I want to cook more than 2 things at once, if I have 3 pots going, I can use all 3. The biodigester that I use only will power two burners well at one time. It's like 15,000 BTUs, so that's two regular burners. So occasionally I run out times that I'm not feeding it, so it's not generating the gas. It will probably about a little over 2 hours of gas a day, and it will make that much every day. But you do have to feed it to get it.
Okay. So feed it after you feed yourself. So why might an event or business compost, and how does it work for them? I know, Amanda, with Pinellas Community Compost, you have quite a bit of experience with businesses. Why do they choose to compost?
So a lot of businesses choose to compost because they would rather not throw their food in the garbage. A lot of chefs and people in the food service industry, they get into it because they absolutely love food. And I think that there's just this inherent understanding that it's not trash. It can be reused and repurposed and returned to the earth to grow more food, or just to be returned to the earth. So there's that component. There's also, as far as the folks who work in the kitchens go, the reports that I get from the businesses that I work with say that the kitchen staff prefers to put their food scraps in containers for composting, like buckets or bins, as opposed to the trash cans that are lined with plastic bags, because it's actually easier for them procedure-wise. Because at the end of the shift, or whenever your trash can is full, you have to take that out to the dumpster. And food waste is wet and it's heavy. And when you're talking about putting that in a plastic bag and carrying that out to the trash, that's kind of cumbersome. So they actually really prefer to move it in the container. And as far as events composting goes, events produce so much waste. Everything at an event, for the most part, most events, is completely disposable. Cutlery, dishes, cups, food, and then of course there's the kitchen scraps as well from the food preparation. And I personally, and I know a lot of folks feel the same way, would prefer to support an event that is taking effort, taking action to reduce their waste, because that shows that they're actually caring about their footprint, and that's important to me.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. We see nowadays, a lot of consumers, they want to put their money where their mouth is, which works in a number of ways for this metaphor. But they're really looking, it's such a branding opportunity. It's such a positive branding opportunity to say this restaurant compost, or this event is, either zero waste, low waste, or compost. And I think more and more businesses are starting to realize that. So for our final question before we get to answer questions from the audience, it's one of my favorite questions. It teaches me the most, I think. What piece of advice do you wish you received when you first started? Tracy, let's start with you on this one.
Okay, and if I could, that last question.
Yeah.
I that some businesses may want to compost or use anaerobic digestion, either one, is to improve the quality, for example, restaurants, to improve the quality of their food. I was just talking with Fat Beat Farm. They're located in Oldsmar, and I guess their family businesses with restaurants. So I think they realize the nutrient value of the food that they're eating, the flavor that it gives the food, and then being able to take care of that food waste. They've got a sense of responsibility as well. So I think it's a feel-good thing for a lot of businesses, and also those that want to lead by example. This is a great way to do it. And like you said, people are especially millennials now, they're really supporting businesses that share their values. So you can show that you're a business or an event that has that type of value. It can be beneficial. But as far as this piece of advice I wish I received when I first started composting, I actually have have done composting, regular composting, for a while. I wish I had known about the biodigestion. It's actually a really good complement to composting. I do both on my property, so I have my compost pile for my yard waste, my weeds and my branches and my leaves. I occasionally throw my food waste in there. I have my home biogas system primarily for my food waste. One of the things I like about it is that it's right in my courtyard. It's right outside my door because it's easy for me to use. So I put it right in there. It's also a conversation piece. But anyway, I like that they complement each other, and so that was something that I has come into my life more recently that I wish I knew about sooner.
Awesome. Mark, what about you? What piece of advice do you wish you had first received?
Well, we're talking 30 years ago when I got started in the organic lawn business. We wasted a lot of time trying to be like the chemical companies, but using organic materials. So we tried to be NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, because that's what the chemical companies were doing. So we found, blood meal, bone meal, feather meal, things like that as sources for the NP and K, and tried to get as highest numbers as we could, those three numbers you get in a fertilizer bag, to try to look like we were chemical companies. And it took about 10 years for it to get through our heads. I won't say thick skulls, but through our heads. We ran into the Dr. Elaine Ingham, who Amanda's taken courses from, her philosophy about the soil food web. And so that's when we started down the road of biological lawn care as opposed to organic lawn care. And the compost that we added in compost tea became a much bigger part of what we were doing. And we sort of forgot about the NPK, and the grass seems to be doing fine without the direct hit of NP and K.
Awesome. And Amanda, what piece of advice do you wish you received?
So when I was a little girl, my grandmother had a compost pile, and every couple days she would have this stinky bin under her sink, and she'd say, go take this out to the compost pile. So we would dump this stinky bin on top of this heap in the backyard. And also in that heap were weeds and all sorts of stuff. There was no carbon in there, and it just attracted flies, and maybe it eventually broke down to be something that was nice on the bottom, but we all thought it was gross. She had like 10 grandkids. And we're like, oh, this is so gross. And growing up, I composted a little bit differently on my family's farm, because we had manure and sawdust and stuff. But I always associated the regular, like city kitchen scrap compost with this stinking heap in my grandma's backyard. And as I grew up and I realized that's not the way it has to be, that that piece of advice right there, that's what I wish I had known 10 years ago or 20 years ago when I was first starting to live on my own and realized that food should not be thrown in the garbage. So it can be pleasant. It can be just a part of your yard, and it can even be placed somewhere where you are near it, like where you hang out, and it's not gross at all.
Well, thank you. Like both three, I think it's really important. Probably when you start out doing anything, you ask the experts, what do you wish you knew? So that was awesome. So now we are going to get into some of the questions. I think we have time probably for 3 or so questions. I'm going to pull these down here. Hi, Madai. Let's see here. This is a good one. They're all good questions, by the way, but I think this is a great one to address right now. Are flies helpful to the compost process?
I'll take that one. Mm-hmm. Yes and no. There are different types of flies. So I'm going to talk about fruit flies, black flies, and soldier flies. So what happens is that a fly is attracted to a smell. They come by and they lay their eggs in the compost, and they go off. The black flies and the fruit flies will hang out. So I guess they don't go off. They'll hang out, and they will be your first indicator that your compost doesn't have enough carbon, that it doesn't have enough brown materials. When you see fruit flies and black flies, add more brown material. Their larva in the compost is not bad. The other type of fly, black soldier fly larvae, those are good. So black soldier flies do not look like house flies or black flies at all. They look more like a wasp. They don't sting though, and you'll see the adults a little bit, but for the most part, they're not great flyers, and they mostly hang out on plants, sitting on leaves in the sun. But their larvae, you want those in your compost pile. They eat your food waste, they break it down faster, they're really helpful, and they're bigger than the black fly larvae. The black fly maggots, they typically are a little bit bigger than a grain of rice. The soldier fly larvae are much bigger. They're maybe a whole inch long, and they almost look like they have armor on them. So when you see those are good. And you don't need to worry about having enough carbon with those. They, you still need to have enough carbon, but they're not a sign that you did not have enough, versus the fruit flies and the black flies.
Thank you, Amanda. Let's see here. If using wire, how do you use it as you are still putting stuff on top? Let me see on this one. So I think the question here might be, you know, in regards to the wire compost bins, I think one, economically it can be very appealing, but some people are still uncomfortable with how it actually works. Can anyone elaborate on, you know, do I need to be worried about pests getting through the wire, or if I'm putting stuff on top, like how do I create the wire compost bin?
Well, if I can take a crack at that. So we had some open wire compost piles, you know, on our farm, and I guess we weren't too worried about pests because it was out in the farm, so I don't really know, you know, how many pests we had there, to be honest, because we didn't live there. It was down the road. But generally it worked very well. Like you leave it open at the top, it gets the natural rainfall, and you just add stuff as you go to the top. I think it works, you know, very well for the cheap, quick, and easy method. And again, I love the open air wire for the air, because that's the number one thing that I've seen in people's backyard composters, you know, with those the big plastic bins, is it's lacking the air.
Yes.
I'll go ahead as well. The wire bands are actually my preferred method. I use either zip ties, wire, or bungee cords to form them into a cylinder shape. And then I add browns to the bottom, about 6 inches worth, and then layer my food waste in there, being careful not to get any on the edges. So I use 1/4 inch hardware cloth, it's called, which is really little. I'm not worried about anything getting in the sides, but if you want to cover it, I recommend actually the black landscape fabric. That is great because it's cheap, and it still allows airflow, and water can still get in when it rains, but not a lot, because you don't want to drown your compost when we have our summer rains. That I don't have a problem with pests in my yard. I am very mindful though that I don't ever leave food waste uncovered. Once you do that and a rodent sees it or smells it and has that open buffet, they're creatures of habit and they might tell their friends and come back. So just be mindful that you to follow the, you know, the protocol, the procedures, and just don't leave any food waste open. If you don't have any brown materials at the time, dig a hole in your compost and then put the new materials in there and cover that hole up. Or you can even use finished compost on top as well.
Thank you. Okay, let's see here. I'm going to try and go over here. So we've got some of this. So bananas are fine to put in your compost, actually excellent. How about this one? Is it better to grind up your browns and greens to accelerate the compost process?
Yes and no. The more surface area you have, the faster that it will break down. So yes, but when you have smaller pieces, there's also less room for air. So you need to be mindful that you're getting enough air in your compost pile. So sometimes I recommend, especially for older folks, to put a few branches in your compost, some bigger pieces of the brown materials, so that you can have more air pockets, so that you have less need to turn it.
Wonderful. Tracy, when it comes to anaerobic digestion, I know you mentioned you need to be a little careful with the yard waste, but when it comes to food waste, do you cut your food waste into smaller pieces, or what do you do? What's the best practice there?
I don't. I never have. As long as it will fit in the tube, which is, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches, I put it in there. As Amanda said, the greater surface area, the more the more the bacteria can decompose it, the faster it will decompose. But if you don't overdo that, then so it would be beneficial for like your first few weeks. You would get faster gas, but if you don't ever do that and you're putting big chunks in there, it's always going to have stuff to work on. That, you'll have big pieces in there to work on the entire time. So I feel like there's no need to do that at all.
Awesome. And Mark, do you have any last thoughts on that question?
I think actually they covered it.
Awesome. Good. Okay, so that wraps up tonight's discussion. Let me see here. There we go. A sincere thank you to Tracy, Mark, and Amanda for speaking with us, as well as each of the attendees for joining us. If you have any questions regarding composting, anaerobic digestion, lawn care, or gardening, you can see the contact information for each of the panelists is up on the screen. Also, if you would like to discuss sustainability within the city of Clearwater, I would love to talk with you, and I can be reached using this email. Please stay tuned for our upcoming compost workshop series, where you can learn the basics of composting at home. And if you are a Clearwater resident, you can attend this workshop and leave with your own compost bin. We are waiting to see how things go with the current national and global recent happenings, and we're waiting to announce an official starting date, but more than likely we're hoping to do it or to start the workshop series this summer. So thanks again to the panelists, and thanks everyone for joining us.